What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Mental Corner podcast, the show where I bring on guests from all different backgrounds to talk all the things mental health. I'm your host, Harry Potvin, and for this episode of the show, I have the pleasure of being joined by Erine Gray. Erine is actually the founder of our sponsor for the last couple weeks, Bertha, which is a leading referral platform for social services in America, connecting people seeking help and the verified social care providers that serve them with dignity and ease. They make it super easy for people to find social services in their communities, for nonprofits to coordinate their efforts, and for organizations to integrate social care into the work that they already do. Their huge platform is used in industries such as education, healthcare, and more. Additionally, they continue to publish mental health resources on their website, findhelp.org, which is a free online resource directory where anyone can search at any time for free and connect with services in their area. I will put all the links to this stuff down below, and whether you're in the United States or not, Bertha is such a great resource. So no matter where you are in the world, I definitely suggest, looking up their stuff because they're doing such a great job down there. Erine was so fun to talk to, and I want to thank him again for coming on and having this discussion with me. Now, before we get into the show, guys, you know the drill. If you're listening, please like, comment, share, subscribe, give 5 stars on that podcast platform, share with someone who might want to hear this episode. It's a really great one, and I can't wait for you to listen. And remember that even though Mental Health Awareness Month is wrapping up, the conversation doesn't have to. Keep talking, keep sharing, keep listening, and let's get this stigma over with. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll talk to you very soon. Peace. Start. I want to say your name right. Is it Erine?
It's Erine. Just Erine. Like you. Yeah, just like Aaron. Just spelt a little different.
All right, you're trying to be different. All right, I see how it is.
Yeah, I was actually 6 of 7 children, and my dad's name is Ernie, and his birthday is July 27th. So he received a birthday card that was misspelled 2 weeks before I was born. And so, once you're at child number 6, they were like, "Oh, that's neat. Let's try it." And here we are.
Yeah, good 45 enough.
Years later.
I love it, man. Well, Erine, thank you for coming on to the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Sure, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
So tell me a little bit about Bertha, because I love what you guys are doing. I looked it up a little bit. It's a great initiative. Where did the inspiration for this kind of start?
So like you, I actually grew up in that part of the world, about an hour and a half south of Buffalo, New York, and a town of about 15,000 people, a small town. And we, my mom actually, as I mentioned, I'm one of 7 children. So my mom was very boisterous and smart and opinionated and very loving, and she raised us, and it was a sort of what they used to call a mine, his, and ours family. So they each had children before they married each other, and we all lived in the same house. And my parents then had me and my little sister, and my mom always had a big heart. And I remember a couple of different times they were teenage kids at 2 different times, boys who were seniors, and the parents couldn't take care of them, and so she opened them into the house with open arms. And even though our house was pretty full with 1 bathroom, mind you.
Oh my God.
And when I was 17, she caught a rare brain disease called encephalitis, which caused permanent brain damage. I've mentioned this many times, but when she got back from the hospital, she didn't remember the previous 20 years of her life. So it's as if those folders in her brain were deleted, and I was 17. And so as you can imagine, she didn't know who we were and didn't remember any events from those previous 20 years. And so the concept really was, I think what I realized in my 20s was that life throws you a curveball and nobody's prepared for it. And I became her legal guardian 19 years ago, and also in my late 20s, and I would find out about programs that were available to people, whether they be government programs or nonprofits that would assist and things like that. And really the idea was, how do you build a search engine so people can at least know what their options are in a couple of clicks? And I fashioned it really after sort of the family member that we all have that's there for us in our time of need. So the name Aunt Bertha actually came because it was, one, partially inspired by my mom, who sort of was that boisterous personality.
Mm-hmm.
But, I was trying to think about what to call it. And, I wanted something, sort of a figure like that. And researched baby names from the 20s and 30s. And originally thought it would be Aunt Sue, but that domain name, cost several $1,000s. And there I was about to bootstrap a business. And so I didn't want to spend it on a domain name. And so landed on either Bertha or Martha. And, I asked my little sister, and we landed on Bertha. So I went to buy that domain name, and it was $13.95. So
So much
price
better.
was right.
Yeah.
And it was never meant to be a permanent name, but the price is right at the time, and I'm not a marketer, and here we are today. So we've recently rebranded our free search to findhelp.org, which is a little bit more intuitive. And we launched that during COVID last year. Same functionality, just a little bit more intuitive of a name. It's been a wild ride ever since. So it's been quite the journey.
Yeah, for sure. So for the listeners, like, is findhelp.org like an extension of Aunt Bertha then?
Yeah, exactly. It's just the name of our service that anybody can use. It's currently only serving the United States, but it's the starting point. So think of it as a, one of our products.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, man, that's awesome. Like you nailed it. Like, life always throws you a curveball, but there's some curveballs that you can prepare for, and then there's others that, like, you don't even see coming. Like, I wonder how you can, because there's a conversation on this show that I have, not frequently, but I've had a couple times about, how do we prepare kids better to go out into the real world? Because for me personally, like, the second I encountered serious stress, I crumbled immediately. So it's like, how do we prepare them for that? But then there's so many different variables you got to consider.
Well, I think one of the hardest jobs is a parent, and I'm not a parent, and I don't know that I could handle it.
Yeah.
And so I'm probably not the right person to answer that. But I don't know. I think when you have something happen, whatever it is that's serious, I don't know that anybody's prepared, no matter how much education they have, or no matter maybe their experience or whatever the case may be. But there's also a little bit of comfort in knowing that, hey, sometimes life just sucks, and but you're not alone, like you said earlier. That most of us have probably had something that felt as equal to what we all are going through. And I remember I was actually driving on Highway 183 in Austin, and it was during the early periods where I was responsible for my mom, and she requires 24-hour care. And when you have somebody who's relatively young that requires that amount of care, and especially somebody with a brain injury, that can lead to behavioral health issues. And so a lot of facilities don't want to deal with that. And so it was rough for a while. And I remember thinking, I still remember I was I was on Highway 183 in front of a Dunkin' Donuts, just passing by it. And it was sort of a light bulb moment where I realized is that, we're all going to have something this serious at some point in our lives, whether it's a divorce, whether it's, any other sort of thing that would happen. And I was in my late 20s at the time, and that gave me a whole bunch of calm after I had that realization.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's definitely important to. I think the problem that a lot of people have, and I say this as someone who experienced it. I can't speak for everyone, of course, but I think the problem that some people have is that they try to fight it, and they try to think, how am I going to word this? They don't want to accept the fact that it happened to them, and I think that denial kind of builds up over time. I think if we taught people to, accept, like, hey man, people go through stuff, like, don't be ashamed to reach out for this, like, don't be in denial about it. I think that would go a long way.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I think of all the time wasted that I've wasted, trying to attack it yourself or to trying to solve the problem yourself.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, that feels like the default
Mm-hmm.
in us. Maybe it's a generational thing. I've noticed we have some young employees, and I've noticed that they're far better at managing their emotions than I am.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely it gives me hope when I see people like my age or younger who are like in tune with how they feel and they're not afraid to express it. I'm like, man, I would pay to go back and feel like that, like
Yeah.
5 years ago.
Imagine if they taught that in high school,
Oh,
and encouraging vulnerability or social or emotional intelligence, or just understanding that your feelings are separate from you. And these are
yes.
things I've learned in my 40s that I'm like, I could have saved a lot of energy and time and, gray
Yeah.
hair and things like that.
Yeah. I'm not there yet, but yes, I agree with you.
Oh, you'll get there. It'll
No,
come
please,
fast.
no, please. I'll do anything. So Aunt Bertha, you founded that, correct me if I'm wrong, 2010?
Yes.
And so this is a quote from you, actually. You mentioned 75 million people in the US every year receive or apply for either a government program or a charitable program. And I think you mentioned that in like 2012. So this was kind of when Aunt Bertha was getting on its feet. Is there a reason why there wasn't something before you guys launched?
You know, I often ask myself that same question because the technology behind what we did isn't that complicated,
Mhm.
actually. And if you think about prior to 2010, the same technology was used for other sectors like e-commerce, like Amazon. I mean, indexing all of products is far more complicated than indexing, the United States' social services programs.
Right.
And making that available via search. But nobody did it in a
Yeah.
nationwide way. I kept looking around and scratching my head as to, why that was. But in other sectors, it's been done. So, we're living in a world where we could be shaving and we can be out of shaving cream and we can just say out loud that we need more. And then tomorrow it's going to be on my porch. And I didn't have to get my wallet out. And I mean, the logistics that had to go into that were insane.
Hmm.
And then now what's amazing is there's a local company called Indeed in Austin, and they indexed all of the world's jobs so that anybody with an internet connection can at least know which jobs are available anywhere in the anywhere in the world, and then they can apply for that online. They
Yeah.
might not get the job, but what that's done is that's almost democratized people's ability to get a job, because the only barrier at a lot of times was information. So those technologies were there, and I was inspired by those companies and others, and I thought, well, how come this doesn't happen in human services? I think what I later learned is that in the internet boom and the venture capital boom, they just weren't investing in social services because they didn't see, an economic return from it. And I think we really benefited from that because we were able to build a product and grow a company by being, the first to do it. And it's been my life's work and certainly the most rewarding experience so far.
Yeah, definitely. Isn't it like upsetting that, these big corporations have the technology to do these things and then they look and they're like, there's no profit though. It could help a lot of people, but I'm not going to make any money.
You know, uh, I'll share a story. Um, I was, you know, I was first generation to go to college. My parents, I never went hungry, but it was definitely paycheck to paycheck. And I was on food stamps for a while. I was born in the housing projects. But, as I was a teenager, we lived in the same house and always got to participate in track meets and cross country meets. And I had a very stable, and loving father. My mom had, her illness, but she also struggled with mental illness. But despite all that, I consider myself lucky. But I came to this with, an understanding of public benefits like food stamps, like the free lunch program and housing projects. Well, when I started the company, I had a little bit of savings, and so I lived off of it. And at one point, I started getting my pitch decks together to try to go to investors and to raise money. And I went through a couple of incubator programs, and I remember I had an opportunity to meet an investor through these office hours that some investors had. And I was sitting in a booth at this location, and I was telling this investor about my idea. And I was writing code at the time. So, we might have, no, actually we did launch, we had a few users, and we're trying to raise, some seed capital. And I was also the lead developer at the time. But he basically said, so let me get this straight. If you're successful, more people will be on food stamps. And I said, well, I mean, it's not about that, but yeah, I think a lot of people suffer because they don't know what's available to them. And, in other ways, it's an investment in that they'll be more healthy in the long run. And he turns to somebody in the booth behind him, another investor. He said, hey, this guy's trying to raise money so that more people can be on food stamps. And he laughed. And I remember that moment. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, my initial thought was embarrassment. And then he turns to me and goes, oh, I'm just kidding. And then I just left, and I thought, I'm not intimidated by, sort of that way of thinking. And I just sort of kind of reminded me that there's ignorant people all over the place. And in fact, as an entrepreneur, you get used to hearing no's from investors, and that's part of the process. And I actually think the process works, because it takes a lot of persistence in order to raise capital for your business. And you need that persistence because that's what's going to keep your business going, in the long run, and help you fulfill your mission. You need to build that resilience. But it just made me realize that I knew far more about the sector than he did. Mm-hmm. And that, there's a core principle. If you're helping people and you may not know the details of the business model, if you just keep helping people, it's just an act of faith that the business model will play out in the long run. And if you're smart and you pay attention, you'll start to get signals and signs of how you might be able to monetize that business. And so I don't spend a lot of time being angry anymore. I was at the time, especially when I was really struggling to raise money. But I think that was a good lesson in that, some investors, they're just wealthy. They're not more
Yeah.
intelligent. They don't have more insight. And that's actually empowering after a while. I say that now. I wasn't saying that day when I was driving home.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that in the room.
Yeah, I was basically thinking, fuck that guy.
Yeah, no, for sure. Man, if more people could think like that, where it's like, just because they have more, like they're in a higher ranking doesn't mean because I've had that too, where not in the business world. I'm not a businessman by any turn, any whatever. I'm not a businessman, let's just say that. But I've been told before, like, hey, you can't do that, and just laughed at for what I want to do. And like the amount of times I just took that and just was like, you're right, I'm garbage, as opposed to going, hey man, maybe you don't know anything about me. And I've kind of taken that attitude now towards life, towards like job applications, this show in particular. I've gotten, people in higher positions like, hey man, do this, not that. Say this, not don't say that. It's like, hold on. I shouldn't, like, just because you're above me doesn't mean I have to take everything to heart.
That's a great point. And yeah, we spend so much time, you know, to be human is to be insecure. And I still struggle with this,
Mm-hmm.
where you start out with the assumption that this person knows more than me, and I'm using my hands, but for the longest time, and I still do it to this day, where I meet somebody new and they're already sort of higher, and then myself is lower, and that status or whatever, which might go back to growing up in a small town where there's sort of have and have nots, but that is something that I think many of us bring, and it transforms everything. But I think once it's interestingly enough, one of our early employees, Chris Duncan is his name. And I remember being very flustered from a partnership phone call with an organization. And he was a very experienced salesperson. And he could tell that I was flustered. And, the company might have had 5 employees at the time, so we were small. And he pulled me aside and he said, you are on the same level as that person that was on the phone. And he was very convicted, and he said, they are no better than you. And, no one person is better than any other one person. And it was exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. And change it. And so over the years, I've learned to sort of really, my job is to educate, whoever it is. And so whether it's an investor that we work with or a potential customer or an employee, if you start from the decision, if you start from the process, if you start with the mindset of thinking that they don't have the context that I have, so let's spend the time having the context.
Mm-hmm.
Or you might also assume that it's a combative relationship, or there's a disagreement that is like, well, they don't agree with me, so I have to prove them wrong, or I already don't want to have the meeting because I know that they don't agree with me. And you've already sort of sunk the meeting if that's the mindset that you go in with it,
Yes. Yeah.
because then you're like, there's weird feelings, and we all do it with our personal relationships and everything else. But the older I get, the more I'm sort of realizing that if you just let those emotions go and you just seek to understand their perspective and seek for them to understand your perspective, you probably kind of work through anything. And I don't know if that's helpful, but it works a lot better that way.
Yeah.
Than the previous way.
Yeah, I think that mindset would help a lot of the tension going on everywhere right now. There is like it's such a weird place, weird world to be in, because you have to pick a side now for a lot of, I mean, some things, there shouldn't be a side. It's like, like human rights and things of that nature, but like for little things. Yeah, I can't even think of an example, but everyone on Twitter is angry
Yeah.
because not everyone's agreeing with them. It's crazy. And no one's willing to listen, which is the other crazy thing.
Oh, social media. I don't know if soapbox are appropriate in podcasts, but social media has done so much damage um, to people, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, and I I'm still on Facebook, mainly to see pictures of my nieces and nephews and things like that. But I don't know what net benefit Twitter has given to the world. And and yeah, I don't know. It and that's not a political statement. You're right. Everybody's angry or is hawking something, and we'd all the filters in media, for the most part, have been a net good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you hope you trust the filters to do a better job, and unfortunately, sometimes you can't. So, although I recognize the world of self-publishing is a very, very good thing. Wonderful things have happened, like great podcasts somebody just decides to do, right? You don't have to go through a lot of filters. But especially kids,
Yeah.
when I was in high school, my most embarrassing moment isn't going to live in infamy for the world to see.
No.
And I can't imagine growing up under that pressure.
Even like I'm only 23, but like I grew up like I was born right before internet, like right before. So I kind of eased into it to the point where nothing from elementary school or really high school is on there for everyone. Like people, I was talking to someone for the show. She's 17 and she's like fully immersed, and she's like, yeah, it's like it's a beautiful thing, but there is so much like body dysmorphia, like
Mhm.
confidence issues, depression has skyrocketed in young generations for one reason or another, but social media is a big factor in that. It's and like how do you navigate it? It's huge. It's like such a big thing, a big entity. Like how do you even regulate that stuff?
Yeah. On the one hand, for those that are willing to put themselves out there, put their vulnerabilities out there, and find message boards or groups that can help them, for people who have gone through something similar. In that way, it's a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a paradox. In other ways, the that feeling that you're that everybody else's lives are perfect, that weighs on you after a while. And it's funny because we develop a muscle memory for that. So if I meet somebody, whether it's an employee that's gone through something, they went through something serious, or friend or something like that. Once I hear their story, I'm right there with them, and I
Mm-hmm.
like them so much better. And if when I don't know that, I tend to judge that maybe they haven't been through something difficult, and then there's a superiority thing there, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
And so it goes both ways, but I wonder that just that constant feeling of you're not good enough, I struggle with, especially when it comes to money and material things, because if you're not fortunate enough to have parents who can afford, the latest fashions or the latest equipment or camps or whatever the thing is, then you're sort of reiterating this feeling of money equals superiority. And I hate that.
Yeah, it's God, it's hard, man. Like, and I always say it, and guests always say it. It's like, don't compare yourself to people on social media. Stop comparing yourself. That's just a highlight. And I say that all the time, and I believe it, but I still fall for it. Like,
Yeah.
I was on Instagram the other day, And I'm scrolling through and I'm like, I feel like garbage right now. And I'm like, oh, wait, it's because every single picture I just saw is like a dude with his shirt off, ripped. And I'm like, I don't have that. So I'm like, oh man, I look terrible. It's like, even I like the best of us, I'm not saying I'm the best, but like the best of us fall for it. It's a dangerous, like, you got to be careful. If you fall, you can fall down that rabbit hole so easily.
And the other thing about social media is that um, businesses are trying to do the same thing as individuals, show the very, very best side of themselves.
Yeah.
Um, and 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 sort of hoping to sort of use hype as a way of showing momentum with the hope that there's more value associated with it. And so in many ways, businesses are manipulating social media to show the progress of their business being further along than it actually is, or make it appear that they don't have problems and things like that. And so um, I do hope that there's a sort of a collective waking up, and I'm really excited that more governments are starting to crack down on the use of data. For example, in California, they led the way on privacy, on disclosing things in terms and conditions. And so it reminds me of a story of my friend in college. His name was Eric. And we were at his parents' house, and his grandparents were there. And it was actually after the Columbine shooting. And it was in the 90s. And he sort of shook his head, and he said something along the lines of, you know, we always overdo it, but eventually, we come around. So he was trying to say that Americans generally always overdo it. But it's almost like a pendulum, and eventually it sets. It's ironic saying that now, 20 some years later, because there's still mass shootings. So maybe the pendulum is getting worse. I don't know, which probably contradicts what we were trying to say.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I'm hopeful. I mean, I think even with the lockdown, people are starting to realize. I have friends who are like, I deleted everything because, I mean, and I'm a fortunate guy. I have a roof over my head. I have like friends and family, but I remember being miserable when this lockdown happened. I was sitting there all glum, looking at my phone, realizing what is the point in liking these, or like, I deleted Snapchat like 2 years ago because all I got were selfies of people saying streaks. And I was like, I'm not benefiting from this. And I think people are realizing that now, which hopefully, starts that pendulum swing back to the point where it's in the middle again.
I think there's a collective awakening going on. I mentioned, we have about 200 employees, and have a lot of young employees, and I'm just so impressed at the levels of empathy towards each other and emotional intelligence. And I'm starting to sort of see what's cool and what's not. And,
Yeah.
I don't know what generation you call it, but they in many ways, they're certainly more evolved than I am. So I still am an optimist, even though, it was a wild 10 years.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
I think it's definitely, I think a big, and it goes back to social media. Well, not social media per se, but the internet. I think the beauty of the internet is that, they all have these resources, like, professionals with mental health resources, or just stories from people sharing their experiences. Like, for me personally, if I was to listen to, not my show, but like I've listened to mental health podcasts and people sharing their stories, and it makes me go back to when I was like 13, and hearing it, I'm like, that's exactly what I'm going through. I get it now, but I never understood it until I was like 20, 21, 22, 23. So I think that's the beauty, is that, even if they're not implementing it in schools, which I think they're slowly starting to, but even if they don't, you've still got this huge resource for kids to realize, like, who am I, and what is this that I'm feeling? I think that's the beauty of this whole mess, quote unquote.
Yeah, people are finding each other and they're connecting, in their ways. And that is the beautiful part about it. I 100% agree.
Yeah, definitely. So with Aunt Bertha, this might be a stupid question, but it keeps coming up in my head. Have you experienced any, because you have a search engine and you get all those results. Have there been any regarding like teens or young people regarding social media and that mental impact? Has there ever been anything specific in that regard?
I would have to look at the data a little bit further, but it's interesting that this is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I was on a webinar that we hosted in the state of New Hampshire just yesterday, and we had the commissioner over the education system, the public school system in New Hampshire, as well as the National Association for the Mentally Ill and NAMI, and a couple other experts on the subjects, and it we're completely dedicated to sort of helping parents get the resources that they need, and also resources for the parents, because it's stressful for the kids, but it's also stressful to the parents who feel like they can't help or don't know what to do or don't know what the signs are. But we do have most of our search activity is anonymous, so we don't know who they are. But it is fascinating what you see, because there's a story behind every search. So I'll share one of them. We in New York City, our search is on every single kiosk. So they replace all the phone booths in New York City with these high-tech kiosks. And if you've been there, if anybody's been there, you must have seen them. And on those kiosks, they have free Wi-Fi and a little tablet, and they put findhelp.org on there, and we get to see the logs. And so I remember at one point looking at the logs and saw that, somewhere in New York City around 1:30 in the morning, somebody looked at a runaway program for youth.
Hmm.
And it didn't take long for me to realize what was going on there.
Right.
So, somebody ran out of their house, didn't have a cell phone, and was looking for help. And then, maybe a different one, but I remember looking at the logs and seeing that there were some searches for emergency cash assistance and emergency, programs, shelters for the homeless and things like that, which is not uncommon because we have, 6.5 million users from all over the country. But then we also have a service where it looks up the IP address. If it's a public IP address where it's affiliated with a business or a school or something like that, then we know, what network they're on. And it certainly doesn't identify individuals, but we saw that, the person doing the searches were on the network of Motel 6. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, it sort of reminded me that, and then when you look at the time of the searches, it's somebody's in a Motel 6, probably the last night that they can afford, on our site, trying to find, their next housing situation, without any money. And that tells you that story. But one of the things that I hear, and I think the data supports it, is that there's not enough supply of counselors for the need that's there. And I think that's getting worse. And that was something that was discussed on the webinar yesterday, meaning even if people knew about subsidized counseling services, there's such a shortage of, organizations that have the capacity to spend time with them that a lot of people are suffering.
Is there a reason for that shortage?
That's a great question. So I heard this recently that at one point, and I'll have to double check, but some magazine put out a list of essentially degrees or careers that have the lowest return on investment. And somewhere in that list was social workers. Mm. And so, it's a hard job to be a social worker or a licensed counselor. And it takes a lot of self-care in order to be able to withstand everybody's stories, over the years. And so there's probably not enough social workers. that are going into the field? How do we make it cool again? And how do we tell the story and recognize that the return on investment is more than just money? It's that feeling you get every night to know that you're doing work that actually makes a difference in the world. And how do we, just really rethink what is a hero in this world? Is it the founder of Twitter? Or is it somebody that's a social worker sitting with people in their hardest moments every day, all day? And it sounds a little bit idealistic, but there is a shortage. But maybe there are some things that we can do either to add recognition or figure out public policy to make it a little bit more sustainable to be a social worker. I think we need more of them. But I think even sort of more importantly, what we collectively do to educate people to be there when people are going through a crisis, like the work that you're doing, knowing that, just somebody without a degree in social work or any training whatsoever, just to notice their neighbor or notice their friend more, or their son or daughter or their parents who are going through depression at a time. And the more we educate people to listen and just be with somebody, without an answer, it might help with the crisis.
Yeah. Everyone's got an ear.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need a degree for that.
Yep. Most people have two.
Yeah, if you're lucky. Yeah, that's a great point. Do you think also that, like, I don't know anything in terms of, I don't know anything about social workers or like that industry. I think that what they do is incredibly heroic, but I'm not very knowledgeable on that. But do you think that the resources that they have for like mental health, do you think that's sufficient, or do you think that also needs to be addressed when we're talking about this whole thing?
The resources that social workers have to address mental health?
Yeah.
Well, I'm lumping in social workers with licensed counselors and therapists. Right. So I'm lumping them all together. I didn't know much about therapy at all until I went to a therapist about around 10 years ago. And in fact, I had a view that it was probably unnecessary, and it was a pretty ignorant view. And I wish I'd gone a lot earlier in life. I wish I'd started going to a counselor in my 20s, because I would have been a lot happier, and so I learned about therapy just by going to a therapist. And so I go every week, and for me, it's the best investment that I ever made for myself. And it's interesting. I've learned so much. And I think when I first approached therapy, I thought, well, when do I graduate? It was literally a question that I asked my therapist. And he said something like, well, I'm going to be going to my therapist for the rest of my life. And he just sort of, and then part of me was thinking, well, you're just trying to keep me as a client.
Yes.
I was a cynical bastard at the time. But at the end of the day, if you have somebody to talk to and you're really saying the things that you might be too embarrassed to say to your partner or to your spouse, or to your family, that's what's most important, is the fact that you're letting somebody see your true self, your raw self. Because what we do is we edit ourselves because we fear that they're going to judge us.
Yep.
And my counselor, it takes trust to be able to do that. And so at some point in our lives, that trust was violated as humans, and it happens to all of us. The question is, do you forgive people when that trust is violated and keep trusting people? Because it's easy to say, I'm never going to trust anybody again. And if you do that, what you're doing is you're closing yourself off to, getting the help that you need. And I think it's hard to recover from. But another thing, um, I have a chance to, I've given a few not trainings, but just sort of informal talks at conferences and even with my team about journaling. So I, in the 90s, I failed out of college twice.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was delivering pizza at night. I wasn't going to class. Um, I had a little bit of savings from a summer job that I had. And so I couldn't go back to college because they wouldn't let me in. So I took a train and I went traveling for a month and a couple of months. And I was at a hostel in Flagstaff, Arizona, and I bought a journal at the travel shop in Flagstaff, and I started journaling. I was in college, and maybe I was 21, 22. I can't remember, 21 maybe. And for the most part, I've been journaling ever since. So I journal most days. And the thing is, for me at least, is once I realized that not being afraid to journal, and it took courage to say the things that I was really thinking in a journal, because there's fear that somebody's going to read it, or that you have to edit yourself. And so in the very early days when I bought a journal, I sort of was acting like I was writing a book, right? And so I would edit myself, and then I'd skip for months on end. But somewhere along the lines, I finally said, screw it. I'm just going to do free form and just share the good, the bad, and the ugly. And sometimes it's like scribbling because there's a lot of anger there, fear. And boy, that's therapy right there. Mm-hmm. And if you can get the courage to write in your journal, even if you just rip it up afterwards. And so one of the things that I talk about is just getting some paper, turning off your phone for 30 minutes, and just saying the stuff that you'd be embarrassed if anybody else read it. And promising yourself at the very end, I'm going to rip this to shreds because there's no evidence,
Right. Yeah.
Nobody's going to find it. You're not going to be embarrassed. How liberating that exercise is, floored me. And I finally got to the point where I didn't care. Plus my writing is so sloppy anyway, it doesn't matter. But like, if you can get the courage to be honest with paper, it means you're being honest with yourself. And that's a major, major, major milestone about how you feel. And for me, that was the first step to finally having the courage to be completely open and, able to, talk to a counselor, talk to my wife, my sister, family members, and it's all related. And so what is therapy really? It's somebody to talk to that isn't going to judge you. And there's different ways of doing it. If you can't afford it, then you can get a journal for $3 at half price books, and you can find a pen. And it's changed my life, and it's a big part of my life. And it's to the point where if I'm cranky in a given day, if you ask me, did you journal today? I'd be like, shit, no, I didn't. You're nodding your head. It sounds like you've journaled yourself.
Well, I mean, I never used to, because I always personally thought it was stupid. Yeah. Before I went to therapy, I was like, why would you write about how you feel? That's kind of dumb. But as a young boy, you're kind of taught that it's a girly thing to have a diary. So I was always like, no, I'm never going to do that. But then I remember there was one day, and it was only a couple years ago, but it felt like everything in my world was crumbling. Like, it felt like everyone was against me. It felt like, people just didn't care about who I was or what was going on. This was when I was at like my lowest point. It was one of my lowest points. It was such a long stretch of low points. I forget where it was in that, but, one of my friends came up to me because I was in the library at my university, and I was visibly upset. Like, it's hard for me to hide it. I have a pretty good mask, but I blush easy. So I was like bright red, and he's like, look, I know you don't want to tell anyone how you feel, but something that helps me is to either write it out or type it out. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. But then, at that point, I'm so desperate because it felt like nothing was working. And I remember just typing on my computer, and it felt like I was going to break the keyboard because I was typing things that like with so much anger. And there were things on that paper that like I still have the paper to, keep me humble. But like I look at that paper and I'm like, I would never have said that to anybody ever. But then after, it felt so good because it was like, wow, you're actually being honest for the first time. And you nailed it. Like people, a lot of people are afraid to go to therapy because it's like, hey, that's not going to work for me. I don't like talking to people. I can't afford it. Of course, that's a big issue. But a pen and a paper is really all you need to get started. It's that alone. And you mentioned it, the tearing up after that in itself is a therapeutic practice. My therapist recommended that. She was like, write who you're angry at, what you're angry at, and then tear it up and it's gone. And that alone is therapy. And I just don't think that people know that enough. I think the idea of therapy is just a one-on-one with someone that you pay money to, but it comes in so many different forms.
Oh, yeah. Thinking about it, I'm so thankful for my journal. It's to the point where I've got a favorite pen, the Precise V5. I don't even know, Pilot Precise V5, and I can't write with any other pen. So I'm a little bit of a prima donna about it, but but my journal knows more about me than any human will ever know, and has been with me through the highs, the lows, and has never once judged me. And I get emotional thinking about it sometimes. And sometimes I just write, "Thank you, journal." And I remember writing things like, the tree that produced this is changing my life. And, I will be journaling for the rest of my life. And in a world of, computers and distractions, one, it's meditative. It's time away from your phone and your computer. But it's just a real gift to yourself. It is foundational. So I can't recommend it high enough. And the thing is, there's three sort of types of days. On your really good days, you're not going to want to journal because life's good. Whatever happened, you're not going to feel like it. On your bad days, you're going to write for like 5 to 10 pages, like you were banging on your computer. You got a lot to get out. And
oh, dude, yeah.
In the past, you're going through something. It's like, maybe a breakup. You get up at 3 a.m. and you pound it out and you write a bunch. And I mean, you don't want to read that one the next day, right? That's gonna
no, you don't.
But boy, you'll be able to fall asleep after that, and so it has its effect. But then the last is the Doldrum Days, and those are the days where it's not terrible, it's not really good, it's not terrible, but those are the most important days because that's when the epiphanies happen. It's like when you just force yourself to do the habit, you're not preoccupied by the terrible things that are going on in your life. And you're not so happy that, you're just not doing the work. But on those Doldrum days, that's when sort of the epiphanies happen and where your unconscious is starting to come out. And I try to do 3 pages a day, which takes about 30 to 40 minutes. But it's always, I keep saying, it's always those Doldrum days where you uncover an insight and you're like, shit, did that come out of my mouth or my head or my pen? And I think that's another way of reiterating the therapy. And so by forming that daily habit, the impact is cumulative over time, but it doesn't get easier. It becomes a habit, but it doesn't get easier to sort of go through those Doldrum days. But if you make that commitment that I'm going to, write 3 pages, no matter what, then one, you're not editing yourself and you're just puking up on the page. But 2, once you've gotten the hard days, enough of them out, that trust becomes muscle memory. And then I think that's when the growth happens. I always love talking to other people who have experienced the benefits of journaling. So I enjoy waxing poetic about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really is a beautiful, like when you mention like the tree that made this is saving my life, like, from the outside looking in, some people might go, "Pfft, that's
Yeah.
ridiculous." But it really is, if you take a second and you think about it, like it's beautiful when you think about it, really. It's like that whole process of making that journal completely changed your life. It's nuts.
There's zero doubt. And, for me personally, it's given me the calmness that I need to, do this, findhelp.org and Aunt Bertha, and to be more present for employees and for family and things like that. And that tree 100% gave us a gift.
Yeah.
And I love this band. It's called Cloud Cult. And Cloud Cult is based in the Minnesota, Wisconsin area. And if you ever get a chance, I would check them out. But the lead singer lost a child at a very young age, and that was two, I believe. And his music just got amazing after that. And he talks about loss and spirituality. And I don't have a good science background at all, but one of the points in many of the songs, and many of when he sort of is interviewed, is that energy is always going. It's never done. It's just in constant motion. And I'm sure that there's a scientific term that I'm not using correctly, but that energy that came from the tree sort of went into the journal and is somehow coming to me, as I'm holding it and through the pen. And yes, there's science behind it. I don't know. I'm becoming more sort of a mystic as I get older.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love all that stuff, the spirituality stuff. People, growing up, people were always like, those guys are nuts. But like, the more I grow up, the more I'm like, I love this stuff, man. This is like, you feel more connected when you acknowledge the energies and the spirituality of it all. Like, even just walking through nature, because that's pretty much the only exercise you can do during a lockdown.
Yeah.
If you just take your headphones out, you put your phone on do not disturb, and you sit in that forest and you feel the energy coming from the river, the trees, the animals, the wind, like, if you take all of that, oh my goodness, man.
I've really gotten interested in just watching the birds, and and I put up a couple of bird feeders in my house, and sometimes I'll journal in my back porch in the mornings before I go to work. And when I'm going through something hard, hearing those birds is like, Erine, get out of yourself. Because no matter what happens, those birds are going to be here tomorrow. They're going to be here 100 years from now. But you've painted an awesome picture of, I can't remember the last time I was deeply embedded in the woods. I need to do that more often.
Yeah. I did it the other day, and I wasn't planning on it. I was planning on going for a speed walk,
Yeah.
just around the neighborhood, but like, for whatever reason, I felt like the forest was calling me, as stupid as that sounds. I felt something go, hey, you should turn right instead of left. And I just sat there for like an hour, and I came back. I was like, I'm glad I did that. I need to work out though. But I am glad I did that. It was so nice.
Yeah, it makes us realize that, there's more, we're just one small piece of the whole thing.
Yes. It puts life into perspective.
Yeah.
So, Mental Health Month is wrapping up. And of course, the conversation should never end, but, it seems like at the end of each May, the conversation kind of dwindles down a little bit. But for Aunt Bertha, like, what's next? Like, what's in store for you guys?
So when our mission is to connect all people in need and the programs that serve them with dignity and ease. And really it manifests in two areas, meaning people will seek help when they're ready. And whatever their issue is, they could, their child support may not have come in, and they um, may have trouble eating, finding, affording food that month, or maybe they need to try to find a subsidized counselor or support group, for kids with a rare, parents of kids with a rare disease, whatever the case may be. And so what we're constantly doing is making, ensuring that we have all of the programs indexed. So we've actually, I should say 99% in the United States, and we're doing one project in Canada with one of our clients called Be Strong, which is an anti-bullying app that people get on their phone. But so ensuring that people have the most accurate information possible when they just type in a zip code is problem number one, meaning if you just know the options that are available to you, then you might actually pursue one of them, and having the most accurate information there, so that when you do face your crisis, or you might need something, that you know which options are available. You may choose not to pursue any of those options, and that's okay too. The second part about it is many people, it took a ton of courage just to admit that they can't do it alone, whatever the need actually is. And then they find out about a service, but why don't they pursue it? And I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And sometimes they don't pursue it because they perceive it to be complicated, or they perceive that they'll be judged because they don't have quite, they have the courage to anonymously search on the internet, but they don't have the courage to finally say, I need help. Just like the first time we all decided to go to a counselor, it took a lot of courage to be able to do that. And so what we do is we recruit nonprofits that use our software to make it easy for people to apply for that service. We call them screeners. So any nonprofit in the country can turn on these screeners for free, and think of it as a way to allow you to say, hey, I'm interested in this program. Here's my phone number. I want to try and get enrolled. And that's our job, is to recruit as many as possible, so that people that are in need and they do show the courage that they're going to apply for a program, we really want them to get the dignity of a yes or a no quickly. And so it's our job to, really encourage those nonprofits to join our network and simplify the way that they help people. So that's what we're focused on the most, is meaning that I think we've already proven that we've made this information available to people who are struggling. They found programs they didn't even know about. But the enactment of the vision is to say, okay, that's great, but I want people to get the help, and I want nonprofits to very easily help them at least get connected, And if you do, then that information tells you something collectively about what's going on across our society. So by studying that information in the long run, you can then see, well, which cities and which counties is supply meeting the demand? Mm-hmm. So by having all of that data in one location, we're able to see that, so many people are really looking for a food delivery program for the elderly, but the supply is so low that there's so many people that are going without that free food delivery program. They can't afford it. So could we take that data and could we put it in the hands of people that can't afford to pay for it, that are able to afford to pay for it, like foundations or state governments, to where they look around in the communities that they serve and they think to themselves, gosh, why don't we fund, more nonprofits in the area so they can increase capacity, so they can essentially help more people. It's an information problem that we want to focus on. And so I think that's what we're collectively doing with our mission, it's all about easing anxieties by letting people know that there's options and here's how you apply. We certainly can't solve the world's problems, but this information problem of letting people know that they're not alone and that there are options and here's how you apply, and here are the buttons you push to get that yes or no, is our little niche in the world.
Man, I love that. Yeah, it's so important to let people know, like, there's stuff available, and then, like you said, that first step, even with the resources, that's like the most impossible step to take. It's just the more you facilitate that, the more people are going to reach out. Look, Erine, this has been a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come talk to me, man. Thank you.
Oh, Harry, it was a real honor. And yeah, thanks. You're a great listener. And I'm looking, hopefully our paths will cross in the same city one of these days. It'd be great to grab a coffee.
Man, I would love to come down to Texas. I actually, as a joke, I was telling my dad, I was like, we should move down there because Ontario's not looking so great. but no, I'm confident. Before we let you go, man, where can people find you? Where can people find Aunt Bertha? Findhelp.org.
Sure, yeah. So if you or somebody you love is looking for help, just go to findhelp.org. Type it in any browser or web device, and type in your zip code, and you can find services in your area. Everything works pretty quickly. I'm Erine Gray, Erine Gray, Gray. You can find me on LinkedIn or Google, or if you want to send me an email, it's egray@auntbertha.com.
Love it, man. I'll put all those links down below. To all my listeners, I will see you guys next time.